Welcome, Neil. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, how's it going, Tom?
Yeah, good, thank you. Excited about this one. I won't ruin it. I'm going to let you give a little intro. So yeah, it'd be great. Just tell everyone about you. Tell everyone about yourself. What you do. You know, in and out of work. It'd be great just to get to know you a little bit more, and then after that, we'll jump into a few questions.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mandell. I work for Samsung Electronics for the UK market as a senior digital marketing manager. So as part of that, I lead up the various paid channels, so paid search, social, display, and affiliates for what we call our MX range of products. So as you can imagine, with a brand like Samsung, there's lots of divisions, lots of categories, but our MX division includes the likes of our smartphones, our tablets, smartwatches, laptops, etc. So heavily involved with all of that as part of quite an extensive team over at Samsung.
Awesome. Well, look, great to have someone of your pedigree on here. You know, I guess you will have a very interesting view of the world, and I think for me, it's always a good place to start. I'd love to kind of see how you see the world of digital right now, from your side of the fence.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting landscape at the moment. I think with the current climate, we're in a times of, I think a lot of what I've heard is, I mean, just from my own experience, but also just from other brands, the year of efficiency.
Okay.
So I think that's where there's a lot of focus from us as a business, but also just like how we're analyzing performance. But naturally, it's advancing as well. There's a lot of new tech releases across different platforms and channels that we work with, and different channels are evolving in different ways as well with the likes of automation. So it's definitely an interesting time, but challenging at the same time. But it keeps us on our toes as a digital marketing team.
And challenging times indeed. Like, are you having to do things differently, or is it just the same stuff, just having to work harder at it?
I wouldn't say it's drastically different, to be honest. I think naturally budgets are a consideration, and how we work harder, like how do we work with our different teams. But I think the foundations of what we do and how we work as a team to like adjust, like for example, our roadmaps as a marketing team aren't adjusting drastically, but naturally the landscape of how we generate results becomes more of a challenge. So for example, we need to work closer than ever with our commercial teams to get the best props available for us to make sure that people are buying our products or more likely to purchase our products. The relationship that we have with our on-site team becomes more important than ever as well, just because conversion rate is key, AOV is key. It's those tweaks and how can we operate more broadly as in Samsung as a business to get those results. But day to day, I wouldn't say it's hugely different because we know those advancements are still there, and that wouldn't adjust if budgets are going down, for example.
And what about the other side of the coin? Like, today in the UK at least, March's retail data was published, and surprise, surprise, consumers have got less money to spend on, discretionary items, which I guess a lot of your products fall into that, right? They're not stuff that people need, so they maybe get pushed out. And by need, I mean food, heating, water type thing. So budgets getting cut is one thing. Are you seeing, does that flow down to you, or actually does where your products sit, people are still purchasing at previous rates, and that hasn't really impacted you, or impacted you in how you've had to think as a team as well?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point. I think we're definitely aware of what's going on in the market. I think looking at, for example, smartphone trends, it's not rapidly on the rise. But at the same time, whilst we're conscious of how people are purchasing, it hasn't fallen off a cliff. People are still buying smartphones, and the way it's approaching it is just changing ultimately. So, for example, as us as a team, the commercial propositions are really important. So, for example, we want to incentivize users to take out finance propositions or like trading options, as an example, whereas before perhaps you would go a bit more feature led. So I think the way we engage with consumers is different. And we need to be very mindful of the types of conversations we're having with them to ultimately sell our product. But I wouldn't say, okay, we've entered 2023 and suddenly nobody's purchasing a smartphone, as an example. Like things like search demand will change over time. But yeah, it's relatively okay for now.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's good to see some consistency. I must say, I was looking on your site earlier, and the thing that jumped out to me was the trade-in button. How front and center that was. So it's really, you obviously got your ducks in a row. You're very consistent, and it was a noticeable. I noticed it. I mean, you don't see that often. You know, trade-in is often something that's awkward or hard to do, right? Not a front and center. So yeah, it's really, really good to see. Because that's interesting. You know, I guess it's not a massive surprise. I guess everyone's on their smartphone. Like when you were talking to one of my colleagues before, you shared some sort of good D2C growth stats, which I thought were super impressive, which would be good for you to go into. You know, what was impressive for me is, the numbers are impressive anyway, but especially when you consider a brand the size of you guys, you know, like it's this quite significant. It'd be great to drill into that, and especially as that's growing in the time that we're living in now. It'd be good to hear what you're doing and what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually sit in the D2C marketing team, but we run activity for both D2C, so ultimately driving orders for Samsung.com, but also we run a lot of mid-funnel activity for Samsung as a brand overall. So as part of one of our team's objectives, naturally D2C growth is a key lever towards that. To be honest, Samsung.com is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. I believe it's only a few years old. To be honest with you, I can't remember the exact start date, but we've seen huge acceleration in recent years, and the D2C growth has been ultimately viewed to increase our market share of Samsung's overall total. So I think it's prior to COVID, we're about 8%, and that's now reached 14% as of Q1, which is like a huge success for us as a team when you consider that not long prior to COVID, you couldn't even purchase a device on Samsung.com. So a lot of our marketing activity was just driving traffic and then like hoping that people purchase through retailers. But now like our e-commerce proposition has massively expanded, and we've done plenty of activity, and that's our day-to-day focus of how can we grow D2C as a team. And that's the long-term vision. How can we continue that upward trajectory?
I guess tell me if this statement is true or false, but it sounds to me like that's probably raised the status of what you guys do, right? Because previously you were, as you say, trying to make sure people went and bought in a physical store, but now actually there's attributed revenue to you. It's like, look, you're driving traffic to a site and people are hitting the buy button. Is it putting more of a spotlight in a good way on digital within the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I joined during the peak of COVID in 2020. So that was a fun time joining a new business. But I think, to be honest with you, I joined when digital was on the up within the business. I think so because I joined in July when COVID hit, we were seeing a lot of people jump towards .com growth anyway. Right. So I kind of rode the train and ran away with it really. But prior to that, not many people it wasn't on many people's radars within the business. And I think D2C is it's seen as a channel partner for Samsung ultimately. But it's so important as like one of the growth areas for the total business, but also, we're still representing the brand itself at the same time. So our successes are Samsung successes overall. We can highlight those stories at an overall level.
Yeah. And I guess it also gives you a really rich stream of insight on your customers, right? That you probably were disconnected from before because of, because you just weren't maybe getting as close to the users. Is that fair? Or did you understand? Because I guess you've got accounts and things, sign-in accounts, but yeah, is it giving you more insight to customers? Is that sales data there adding value to what you're doing?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the pre and post D2C has necessarily been the cause of that. I think it's just the natural direction as to where we've gone. I think naturally with the news of like the cookieless future being a factor, I think we needed as a team to get our ducks in order really to prepare for that moment when it eventually happens. I think as a result, our team is massively placed to focus on our customer base and how we can grow that, but also just understand the users a lot more. And naturally, that will impact our paid strategy because we're not just considering all of the third-party audiences available through the likes of Meta and Google, etc. It's also like, okay, every time we've got a major phone launch, as an example, like how do our users interact with a flagship campaign? What are the types of users that will purchase definitely versus who are the users that need to get an extra incentive to get them over the line with the purchase? And naturally, from a pay perspective, that's opened up lots of questions on how can we work with the CRM team from an organic perspective. So as a team, we actually sit in the same team, paid and CRM. So naturally, like the flow between our two teams is really fluid, and it's it's a really important area for us just to make sure that the lines of comms are consistent, but also the audiences we're targeting are there's a flow between the two sets of channels.
But do you have sort of analytics resources in the team, or that you can turn to? Do they sit within marketing, or are they sort of a central function that you have to try and get time with?
So we have our own analytics team within D2C, and they've kind of gone in and out of sitting within marketing. To be honest, our team changes quite a lot, but that's natural with like the growth of D2C and it being a relatively new team. But yes, they sit very closely within marketing, and a lot of the guys who work in the data and analytics team actually have a marketing background, which works to our advantage. And essentially, when we have a big campaign, whether that be like a big phone launch or a Black Friday campaign, they're key to that briefing process and how we want to operate as a team. So to give you an example, prior to the recent S23 launch, when we're working with like outlining the strategy, it really starts from the foundations of who are our customers who are likely to convert and how do we want to approach it as a team. And naturally, we will inform our agencies of all the insights that we have available to us. And like, that's such a rich resource. And that will naturally influence the structure to some extent. Obviously, there's nuances here and there. But it's so key to the strategy. And we're very lucky to have a strong analytics team because, I know that resource isn't always there to such a high extent as what we have.
When you say, the key piece there is understanding who is likely to buy.
Yeah.
What do you mean by who? How are you creating these cohorts? How do you characterize them, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, I'm not always close to. Well, in fact, I'm never close to the algorithms that decide the structure. But we have propensity modeling to understand. So we tier the system. So we know that tier 1 customers, for example, are very likely to purchase. The data points would be things like, for example, they buy a Samsung phone every year, or their demographic fits a certain profile who, have a higher propensity to purchase. But then we also use data in the back end to look at different profiles of users depending on the campaign. So we have what we call D2C personas. And for that, for example, we know that ahead of a Black Friday campaign, we might have people who are really key to purchasing gifts. or people who are gamers, or if you look at our consumer electronics divisions, like people who are moving home, as an example. So it's like we have different approaches. It depends on the campaign level. But yeah, I wish I was closer to it to be able to tell you the nuts and bolts behind it. But I really leave it to the brilliant data team that we have behind the scenes.
No, that's good. There's still a lot of insight there.
Yeah.
You mentioned it a few times, but like product launches versus sort of, business as usual. Do you see them, or do you do much differently as a team? I appreciate you might have used different personas depending on that, but is there anything else that you do differently? Do you think differently about them, or actually it's the same type of process for you guys?
No, I would say it's quite different, because though if you think about a product launch, or what we describe as an unpacked event,
Really?
a lot of focus is around a moment of users like joining a live stream on Samsung.com where there's a grand reveal. So like someone's on stage and goes, "This is the Samsung S23," and releases all the features. And naturally that will impact our marketing activity. So to give you an example, if you're looking at paid search, if you look at Samsung S23 demand over time, you'll see that day 0 is our highest day of the year. So if we've got 2 flagships a year, there's so much focus on getting those day dot strategies correct, and it needs to be a flawless execution from us. And naturally there'll be a lot of pressure during pre-order periods, because those are important for the D2C team. So they can be quite short burst, intense periods during a flagship launch. And then kind of when it reaches a BAU period, it develops over time. So it's still naturally important, but it would be much more of a different type of approach. So for example, there may be promotions, or there may be more mid-funnel strategies that we want to implement as a D2C team, for example. So it definitely evolves over time. It's kind of like we go through waves as a Samsung team. So like we usually have a flagship launch in Q1, that dies down, and we have promotions coming up. And then, by the time we get to Q4, it's Black Friday season. So a lot of fun goes on there.
Yeah. We work pretty much exclusively with e-commerce businesses. So we almost have the inverse, if you like. Like we're really busy up to about November, and then nobody wants to talk to us because everyone's in lockdown mode. We just need to get this over the line type mentality. So
I would say we probably have 3 or 4 of those. Like prior to working at Samsung, I've worked on like travel brands, for example, and we know like Black Friday is peak season during that. For us, we've got about 3 of those every time we launch a phone. So it keeps it really interesting and lots of fun. Keeps you busy as well. But look, it's all good.
Nice. And one thing we're kind of seeing more and more, well, it's talked about at this stage, is the sort of coming together of digital and brand. I don't know, like, is this something that you see within Samsung? Is this something you think that just already happened and it's just people talking about it? Like, I'm always intrigued to get people who are doing the job's view on it. Really, like is digital and brand, are they starting to kind of converge as together, if you like?
I think so. I mean, my whole time at Samsung, I think has been pretty closely knit. I mean, from your experience, do you hear a lot of brands say otherwise?
It's more people are sort of starting to suggest it. Like, say for example, we were speaking to people the other day, and they were kind of talking about more performance budget, which is normally very actively driven. It's all about the various figures. Well, actually, 10-20% of that we're going to allocate to brand building activities. So we're not going to measure 20% of that budget in the same aggressive way, because we're trying to build, long-term brand. And it was sort of, we've heard this sort of story. We're just hearing it more and more, really. And I think I'm always intrigued. So I think maybe some businesses are already doing it, And other businesses are like, no, it's very different. Our brand team sit here and our digital team sit here, and the brand team don't think digital's a channel, and we kind of see everything in between. So it's always interesting.
Yeah. I would say we sit somewhere in the middle of that. So
Okay.
I think for a brand like Samsung, naturally, it's so large that we have a performance marketing team, but we also have a separate brand team. I think where it works well and there's a really good flow between the two teams is actually a lot of the performance marketing budget comes from the brand team, but it's not really the case where they take our budget away to upweight brands. They're two very different funding sources, but we work very closely and align on things like creative and audiences, as an example. So from a D2C perspective, yes, we're focused on performance marketing. And I think how we work with the brand team is to understand, what's important for the business overall, what propositions do we have, but how do we time it to kind of get the right messaging to the right audience ultimately. So to give you an example, we recently had an offer where if you buy the S23, you get a free pair of Buds wireless headphones. And, we know that was a Samsung.com exclusive offer. And we know that's an important message that we want to promote. But we can have a conversation with the brand team to go, okay, for your top of mind awareness activity, we know that doesn't have a place. You have your own strategy. You're going to continue focusing on the features, the release of the S23 device. But we know, for example, our mid-funnel strategy, where consideration is a factor and the KPIs are more focused on quality visits, as an example, that's where we can have a debate as to, okay, what do we have as our key messaging at the moment? Oh, okay, well, it probably makes sense to promote free Buds because we know the performance is better, because, we want the same goals. I think the brand team, they obviously want D2C to excel, but they want Samsung as a business to excel as well. So I think it's just about getting the balance right between what I'm trying to achieve versus what they're trying to achieve, and just trying to get that balance. But it's complicated, and yes, at times it can be a challenge, but I think we have a pretty good setup as far as it goes. But I am aware we're probably in a position of luxury of the scale that we have facilitates that. And I can imagine for smaller businesses, there would probably be a lot more questions as to getting that balance right.
That's really insightful, actually. It's quite interesting to hear how you handle that, especially, with such a large portfolio that's not D2C, right? So there's a much bigger consideration there. So it's really interesting. And what about, I guess, community, Samsung loyalists, whatever the badge, but you'll have a huge pool of people out there, as you say, who are going to buy, the new phone as soon as it comes out. They'll have a Samsung TV, and whenever you guys release a product, they'll buy it. Is that something that you try and tap into them as a bigger audience as well? There's those loyalists, or do you actually have a phrase for them? Maybe, I don't know, but
I think Samsung loyalists is a pretty good way to describe them. That is naturally part of our strategy. So if we've got a big flagship launch, we will consider who are the users that are going to purchase, what's going to bring the people who love Samsung back. And ecosystem is a big part of our strategy as well. So for example, users who have bought a smartphone, why do we want them to buy like a smartwatch or a Buds or a laptop ultimately? But to be honest, we can do more as a team, and I think that's the direction we're going in to achieve growth. How can we speak and engage with our users more regularly, to people who love the Samsung brand, to kind of make sure that they're valued as a customer, but also from a sales perspective, how can we bring them to tap into more products overall?
I guess the more products they use, the more influential they are to their peers, and hey ho, we're on a great vicious cycle where D2C grows even faster, I guess.
And we've got like a loyalty team as well.
Okay. Where do they sit?
So they actually sit within D2C. So we've got like a rewards program, but it's relatively new. So that's quite a good example of an area of how do we grow and interact with those types of customers. So there's more to come, I would say, in that space.
Yeah, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to watch that. I think loyalty is an interesting one that gets unpacked at different times. I think, especially right now, people are trying to incentivize, the customers they've got. Customer acquisition costs are high for a lot of businesses. So actually loyalty is a really interesting topic. So I'll keep an eye on what you guys are doing there. So switching gear a little bit, you posted the other day about ChatGPT on LinkedIn. I think, as an AI business, analytics business, running a podcast, that it's a topic that's coming up a lot. Just be good to hear. Well, it's a two-piece question. Like, what's your general view on it as a tool for marketers? And be good to hear what sort of things you're doing with it, or on that side.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I don't think you can ignore it. I think every time I go on LinkedIn, it's everywhere. Probably a bit too much, if I'm being honest. But
agree. Yeah.
There's a lot to digest with it all, but it's really interesting. I think for someone with a search background as well, it's probably the thing that's come out in the last 5 years that I'm like, oh, this is shaking up a marketing channel like in a real different way. The battle between Microsoft and Google's come to the fore, which is I think that's really interesting to keep an eye on. And ChatGPT is really interesting to use. I personally, I think I'm at the stage of playing around with it, trying to understand how it can work. But I think as marketers, we really need to be taking it on more. I think there's a balance between like quick prompts to like ask a question or write copy. I think that's a very basic level, but I'm seeing a lot online around like how it can plug into different platforms. So like, how can you work with customer base and data you have in Excel, for example, to tap into it. So I think the recent announcements from Google and Microsoft of like expanding as a workplace, I think that's where it's really interesting and where it's growing. I think personally as a marketer, I'm not using it day to day. I must be honest, but I'm keeping an eye on it, and it's just interesting. I probably should be doing more, but for now I'm just keeping up to date with the news of how it's controversial, but how it's interesting, and just how it is an exciting time, especially in the search space.
I'd agree. I think it's super exciting, but it's not without risk. So I think it's okay to be sitting on the fence. It's half the problems with some of this. If it's used responsibly, it's great, but if you're using it in a rush to get something out and you're not doing the due diligence of what's been produced, it's quite easy to put some players out there. Google have one with Bard, right? That cost them billions on their share price when they put it out. So it's I think it's super fascinating, and I think it'd be interesting to see how that impacts kind of on-site journeys, in terms of
definitely.
Are people going to spend less time going to the sites that they want to go to? So I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of years. Continuing that, I think one of the things I saw in your bio is you're an analytical person. And we've already talked briefly about I know you kind of work closely with the analytics team. In your role, again, we've touched on it with the first party data with cookies coming to an end. But has this move to solutions away from cookies? Has it made your role more analytical, do you think, or is it just a different type of analytical now?
To be honest, I wouldn't say it's influenced that trait on a whole scale level. I think just how we're working as a team changes over time. So I think it's more, I would say the cookieless step is more influence the strategy rather than how I necessarily look at data. And that goes back to the point of our uptake of first-party audiences and how we want to be using our base as part of our paid media strategy. I think just the analytical stuff is just from, I don't know, just one of those natural traits.
Who you are, yeah.
Yeah. It's quite funny. Like, I studied history for a degree, and then it's one of those classic, like, oh, okay, you're going to be a librarian or something. And I was like, no, I swear, there's transferable skills. And I've managed to take that over into the world of digital marketing. But yeah, it's just how I like to look at things. And I think I love getting into the detail with the data to understand, what the story is, what the narrative is, but also the challenge of taking that story and simplifying it when you're speaking to someone else outside of marketing team, people who don't know the day-to-day technical details in the same way.
Yeah, and it's super important, right? That last bit is where most businesses fail. They've got lots of data, but they can't tell the story with it to the business. So the business are like, so what? And they don't move forward, which is it's great. So then switching gear, as we sort of start to bring it to a close, you're analysts on one side, but you also played at Reading and Leeds. The band.
Yeah, I did.
That's pretty cool. So, what do you play? And tell me about the experience.
So yes, I played back in, I think it was 2016 now. So
sure.
Yeah, going a bit back now. I play bass guitar. I stopped playing in a band as of 3-4 years ago, to be honest. But like a lot of my spare time, I just used to play in a band, play lots of shows around the country. And I think, we got the opportunity through BBC introducing to play Reading and Leeds. So yeah, that was pretty cool highlight, It was a funny experience. It was one of those like surreal things, because I used to go when I was, I don't know, like 14 to 16, and then going as like in my mid-20s. It was a bit surreal, just being like, okay, one, I'm back here after a few years. Two, everyone's really young and I feel very old. But three, just kind of taking in this whole experience of, I don't know, being backstage, going to the canteen. Like there was one moment where we're backstage and I was like, oh, there's the drummer of Fall Out Boy with a security guard. And just stuff like that. But
that's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. If you dig deep enough, you can find it on YouTube.
Nice. That's a great story, and what a great experience.
Yeah, it was cool.
Although you worry me, I'm obviously, you're on video, so people can see I'm a good number of years older than you. I was due to go back last year, I think it was, to see Rage Against the Machine before they cancelled. So
yeah, I saw that.
If you said you felt old in your 20s, then at my age, I'd hate to see how old I felt.
No, but to be fair, I know what you mean, because I would go back and watch Rage Against the Machine now as well. But there is a base of a lot of people who just finished their GCSEs, for example, and that's what I was really excited about when I was that age. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't feel out of place going back now, but yeah, it's just a bit of a surreal moment when I was actually playing it. But
yeah, very cool. Great story as well. Great experience to have. So yeah, awesome. Listen, Neil, I think it's a good place to end. Thank you. It's been really insightful to sort of, hear from, someone who's responsible for, the D2C side of digital for a brand the size of Samsung. I think there's loads of great insight in there. And I think, especially right now, a lot of our listeners, they run D2C businesses. As we said at the top, it's tough times out there. It's, the climate's hard from a consumer point of view. Costs are going up for businesses, and actually, I think you've given people some interesting things to think on. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
No probs. We'll see you soon.